Because to a lot of people, this is like Sauron saying he's become a cultural hobbit. I built Mordor, but I'd rather live in the Shire.
Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
And I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
Richard Dawkins is back in the headlines.
Here we go.
Just Professor Dawkins making headlines again. He's being controversial again. He hasn't done that in a while, so it's about time. But this time he's talking about Christianity in more positive terms, which is likely to be a surprise to many of you because, after all, being hostile to Christianity is part of Professor Dawkins' whole brand, is it not? He is, of course, a doctrinaire materialist and indeed a very dogmatic one. In fact, I think, Nathan, we've both heard Richard Dawkins referred to as an evangelical atheist.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that term is misused here. But he was on an interview, and I'll link to it in the show notes. He was on an interview recently where he identifies himself as a cultural Christian. And he makes it very clear that he doesn't believe in God, doesn't go to church, doesn't read his Bible, but he likes cathedrals, he likes hymns, and he also believes, along with increasing, we keep talking about this on our podcast lately, but he seems to now being kind of admitting that Christianity has in some way sponsored some of the civilizational values that he deeply cherishes. And he also has some remarks to make about he's not comfortable that there are thousands of mosques being built in England where he is, and he would rather live in a Christian culture than a Muslim culture. So that sent shockwaves. People are talking. Some people think this is great. Some people think this is not great at all. One person who thinks this is not great at all is Russell Moore. And we'll link to this article in the show notes as well. Some of you have likely read it already. This appeared in Christianity Today, of course. And there, Moore makes an interesting proposal. He basically says, if I were Uncle Screwtape, Christianity is easily co-opted. And so what Richard Dawkins was doing before, by just blatantly attacking Christianity, now, it just didn't prove to be a very effective strategy. But cultural Christianity, where it's seen in more pragmatic terms, could actually do a lot to undermine the real authority of the church and the real prophetic edge of the church. And so Russell Moore sees this as a bad thing. This is a bad development. I think I disagree with him.
Okay.
So that's probably where I would, but I suspect, well, I don't know. I don't want to guess here on what, but I know, Nathan, you have in the past expressed reservations about, say, the motivations behind the conversion of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, for instance, that, this smacked of political pragmatism a little bit. So I thought you and I could kind of wrestle with this.
Yeah, let's kick it around a little bit
this morning.
Yeah, so
it's interesting
because to a lot of people, this is like Sauron saying he's become a cultural hobbit. It's like
that's a fantastic quote. That needs to.
It's kind of like
needs to be written down.
I built Mordor, but I'd rather live in the Shire. So, and I don't think it's all that. I do think there are, just to tidy up some loose ends you threw out there, I do think there's a significant difference between Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Dawkins in that Hirsi Ali has leaned into the legitimate confessions of the church and is trying to make a move in that direction, where Dawkins is saying, I don't believe a single word of it. So I see that as, distinctly different. Now, to Russell Moore's point of whether or not cultural Christianity in this way is a threat to the church, I would say, yes, absolutely. I believe that is true, but it has nothing to do with Richard Dawkins. I think cultural Christianity has been a threat to the church for roughly 1,600 years. So the degree to which, Richard Dawkins is part of the new atheism, he's way late on the show of cultural Christianity. He's off by about a millennia and a half there. So, I mean, you just go all throughout. If you look at everything from, let's pick on some foreign countries instead of on ourselves here, of, Kenya being a very culturally Christian nation and phenomenal levels of corruption. You can look at,
Hmm.
or here's a darker version of this, of Rwanda being declared one of the most successful missionary endeavors with some of the highest conversion rates of any country right before the genocide that occurred there. So
Hmm.
the idea that you would take kind of a cultural look at Christianity and apply that as a system is nothing new. It's always been there, and
Hmm.
very rarely does
Yeah.
that embody anything that radically represents what the church actually stands for. I'll give you one more. I was reading something. This is a Wendell Berry thought where he said I can think of no country or culture that you could infer the gospel from looking at that country, and the way that
Hmm.
its practices
Hmm.
and its policies. And I thought that's actually an interesting way to think about, is cultural Christianity real, or is there a Christian nation or a Christian culture? Is to say, could you work backwards from the core principles of that culture and see the gospel reflected in it? And so to that degree, I don't think you do get Christian nations and Christian cultures in that sense of that phrase. So yeah, there will always be those who want to. Hey, you can take this. I remember one of my grandpas saying one time. He lived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He said everybody wants to have the Amish for their neighbors, but nobody wants to be like them. And this is simply just that
Hmm.
ramped up to
Yeah.
another level of saying,
Yeah.
hey, which neighbors would you prefer if it doesn't demand anything from you? And so I see Dawkins just fitting right into that.
Well, those are some very apt examples that you brought up. So, in a sense, what the civilizational benefits of Christianity, it would seem, given what you've just said, depend on some concentration of actual Christians
Right.
as
Yes.
well.
Yeah.
So yeah, and here's your Amish part. Everybody wants these people. Let's expand the Amish to include just sincere Christians who, by God's grace, are not perfect, but men and women of virtue because they believe that the supreme command is to love God and love neighbor. So everybody wants these folks as their neighbor. Nobody wants to live a life of self-sacrifice the way they do, but they enjoy the benefits of living near them. But you need those folks. It's perfectly possible, we see in some of the dark examples that you offered, but that are all too real, to have a culture that's predicated not on a small concentration of people of virtue who are actual Christians, but just the kind of outworkings. So you have the architecture, you've got the cathedrals. You might even throw some hymns in there because a lot
Hmm.
of everybody loves hymns who lives in Oxford, especially,
Christmas
right? Of
times,
course, Richard
carol
Dawkins loves
services.
hymns,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, no, I remember hearing stories about one of the there was once a venerable tradition of reluctant atheists. They were
Hmm.
atheists, but they weren't happy about it. Matthew Arnold, who, writes Dover Beach, the great, faith is this great receding tide. And another one was Thomas Hardy, who had a very tragic vision of life, wrote The Mayor of Casterbridge, Tess of the Dubervilles, and so on. Well, he
Far
used
from the
to,
maddening crowd.
wander into correct, yeah, and he would wander into cathedrals just to take in those glorious hymns, but of course he didn't believe any of it was true. But if you have only that, then it's perfectly so basically that's almost a form of sort of, this is a very crude analogy, but you've got the interior design, but you have none of the sincerity of the convictions behind it.
Yeah. So
And so then it's
that, but
perfectly possible to have the vestments but no actual conviction. And then yeah, you're absolutely, you can have the corruption and all of that. You need real sincerity behind some of it.
mhm.
Does that make
Well, and so
sense?
that's what's
Yeah.
interesting though, is that the things that Dawkins says he appreciates are like second degree removed from the core of the Christian faith. Um, I remember even
Hmm.
in my short stint on the other side of the pond in his neighborhood, this idea that I think there was an Anglican church there who had a lady who was their vicar who was an atheist, who said, it doesn't really matter
Hmm.
whether or not I
Yeah.
believe. I can still, lead these prayers, still lead these hymns, and appreciate the cultural heritage of it. And that's what the people are coming for anyway. And so it doesn't matter that I don't have a faith of my own. That's like, um, you're running on fumes there at that point. And so even embracing that level of like, oh, this is nostalgic and nice, it's not going to cut it for you long term. So yeah, I don't share Russell Moore's nail biting here. I think this is rather insignificant and just joins what's a more significant movement of people saying, yeah, there's some benefits to that, but I don't need to take it serious or participate in it. But I kind of like that it was around. Um,
Well, yes. I mean, and here's where so let me say two things here real quickly. Firstly, what we've said about what Richard Dawkins is saying, I think is actually in some ways a very moving admission. So I will go ahead and say that. I'm amazed that he's at this point.
well,
I
I mean, he
think
was
that
speaking
also is
publicly not so long ago, like how you should be mocking Christians in public. I mean, so this is a
you
change.
should be mocking them. Not
Ridicule.
only
Yeah.
that, but that proselytizing your children or teaching your children about Christianity is child abuse. He said that too. So this is a stunning reversal. So it takes some humility. I know that's not. I mean, and again, I know some people are probably scoffing as they hear me say this, but I think it does. I think it takes some humility to make
Well,
this
Dawkins
admission.
is
But
known for his
it's also
humility.
an indicate. He's known for his humility, yes. But this is also an indicator of just how bad things are too. I think if we come to a place where a Professor Richard Dawkins is making a statement like this, it means that the cultural breakdown is so severe that even a Richard Dawkins would be
Okay,
saying this. Now,
so
yeah.
let me clarify your point there a second, because I think this is important. Is
Mhm.
that you could say that some of the cultural criticisms are, well, it's just Christian hand wringing and nobody takes them seriously. But this is not
Mhm.
Christians saying, hey, you should be watching out for the Islamic view and treatment of women. This is Dawkins saying that. Um, he doesn't have a dog in the fight. I mean, he universally disliked all religions. So for him to start making some
That's right.
discernment phases between them, it means something. I mean, it's something that's
It
obvious to
means
us and we've all
something. It
known, but the fact that he's the one saying it
Mhm.
does add a little bit of ink in the column of what a lot of Christians have been saying for a long time.
Well, there is something convicting here too, though, because I think in North America, it's been my experience, and I say this as a missionary kid, and I've been here for over 20 years. So this is my home now, but I'm still a cultural outsider in some ways. I was born and raised in Europe, and I can tell you, Nathan, that uniquely among American evangelicals, there's this deep desire to fit in ways that are not possible in other regions
Mm-hmm.
of the world. I mean, in secular post-Christian Europe, it's not if you're a Christian, if you're a sincere committed Christian, you're not going to fit in the same way that somebody else will. You just aren't. It's not open to you. But here because of that, because a lot of Christians have operated as though we're predominantly suffering from an image problem as Christians, we just need to make Christianity as appealing as possible. So we've tend to sometimes we tend to be a bit embarrassed about the specifics of our faith, and now, I mean, those specifics that we would be a little bit tempted to downplay would be sexual ethics or Christian, the Christian convictions about identity. Because the cultural idols there are very strong. And so here's where I disagree with Russell Moore a little bit in this article. He I don't know if he makes this. I mean, it seemed somewhat explicit to me, but he tends to draw a line from Richard Dawkins's cultural Christianity, and then he brings in Christian nationalism again. Did you notice how he did that, Nathan, in the article, especially toward the end?
So
Because he says, yeah,
no, you
I'll
finish
let
your
you
thought
respond to
and then
that
I want to
first.
jump. No, finish your thought and then I want to jump in here.
Yeah, so he brings in a familiar target once again. This is, the specter of Christian nationalism, which you and I both agree there is some real danger there. Absolutely. I mean, whenever you face times of cultural crisis, the temptation for the church is to turn to force in some way and to seek out some kind of prince who will defend Christianity rather than looking to Christ and his kingdom. Okay, we know that. We have talked about that. But he brings that in here, and I just don't think it fits at all. Because I suspect it's because he makes statements about how Christianity wants to distinguish itself in an us and them sense from, the feared other. Well, in this case, I'm assuming that he means he has in mind Islam, because the reporter specifically asks Richard Dawkins, I think there's something like 4,000 mosques being constructed right now in the UK. How do you feel about that? Well, I don't feel good about that. I don't want to live in an Islamic state. I don't want to live in a place that's influenced by Islam. I want to live I would rather live in a Christian nation, he says. And that goes back to certain can we comfortably say certain cultures are superior to others? Not people superior, the cultures superior. And Richard Dawkins makes that claim, and Moore uses some word like, this triumphalistic vision. Well, I don't think that's a triumphalistic vision. I agree. I happen to agree with Dawkins on that. I don't want to live in an Islamic state. And I also don't want to live in an authoritarian state like China. And I think what we have in North America is better. And I suspect so does Russell Moore. And I might be misreading him on this point, but bringing in that slide from cultural Christianity is dangerous because it gives us a Christianity without Christ, and thus it's weak. Okay, I can be with you up to that point.
Yeah.
But then saying that we're moving from that to Christian nationalism, I'm not with you there. I don't see that here.
Yeah.
Am I off my rocker? Yeah.
No, so one of the things that I think you have to think through in a situation like this is what would that actually take, or what would that actually mean? There's some massive leaps of like so we're not living in the days in which there can be like some kind of crusade within America that reestablishes the church. So if you just look at the entire way in which our whole cultural and legal system is set up, it does seem like a far-fetched leap to think that there's I mean, you can say that, but I don't even know what that means. Like, flesh out for me what you think thinks is happening there. Of how would that even work? I guess but I also see this overfixation on the nationalistic part being part of that trying to fit in thing that he's always decrying.
Right.
So it seems to me that I think I'm sitting on the cusp, and maybe, so we're like later 30s here, but there does seem to me to be a divide, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Cameron, and everybody who listens to this, that if you're younger than me, you already have an extremely clear vision that you do not fit in with the culture around you. And it's just so obvious that you're not even trying, like, the ship has sailed. And so your focus probably is on your local church and your local community and on your own spiritual growth and disciplines and your family. And you're trying to live out a life of discipleship. And I'm not saying that people older than us are not trying to do this. I'm just saying that there's a certain generation who still has a lot of eggs in the basket of like, oh, we just got to get the right people elected and this will be fixed. And you're looking at it saying, nah, probably neither one of your options are going to be much of a help to you here. So I don't know. Maybe that's too narrowly defined.
I agree. No, well, I mean, it's a generalization, and so that always runs that risk. But I think it's certainly true to my experience as well, where you have that generational divide of some people who do seem to believe that genuinely we can still turn the clocks back, and others who say no, that's not possible.
Well, if you want to talk about pragmatism here, let's think through some of the common phrases that you often hear, like, we've got to get prayer back in schools. What in the world does that mean, and how would that work? Think about if your child is part of the public school system right now, you pick which teacher you want to teach your kid to pray. It's like, no, I don't want the state religiously educating my kid. And so there are these things that are like, it sounds nice, but if you think through what that would actually take and what that would actually mean and how we're structured as a society, I don't see how you would pull that off and how you would do that without some kind of cataclysmic change, and B, whether or not it's even a good ideal to be aiming for in the first place. And so that's the difference there of, do you think a church, a nation that has more cathedrals than mosque and sings Christmas and Easter hymns instead of lighting the streets for Ramadan, like, is that it? Is that the only difference there? Sorry, I'm sounding more cynical than I probably really am here. It just seems like we're trafficking in a lot of we're trafficking in a lot of platitudes and words and phrases and quasi political ideas that I don't see how they touch reality that I'm seeing.
Well, if you can have a travesty like the simultaneous, you know, what's happened in Rwanda, and then a statement like this is the most successfully evangelized place in the world, then we have to go back to that fundamental truth that in order for Christianity to actually quote work is a word that makes us uncomfortable here, but work in the sense that actually nourish a region, a nation, a neighborhood, it's going to depend on actual Christians. Now, here's the amazing thing, Nathan. You don't need a whole lot of Christians to do that. It
Mm-hmm.
can be a small, it can be, I mean, if we look to historical examples of Christians who have exercised an outsized influence on their culture, it has been their virtue and the outworking of their virtue, and they're not always in great numbers, and
Yeah.
often not with a whole lot of political force or power or anything like that.
Well, so your biblical
But
imagery
you
would be
do
salt
need
and
some,
yeast. You don't need a lot of salt and you don't need a
right?
lot of yeast to have an outsized impact. Um,
But you do need real men and women of virtue. This is why, by the way, we keep stressing on our podcast the real solution. If you want to use the word, I mean, the word solution makes me uncomfortable too. But yeah, the real what will actually work is going to be focusing in our local congregations and with our brothers and sisters in Christ on cultivating virtue, which just means obedience to Christ by the power of the Holy Spirit. We do that, you will see amazing changes happening in your culture. You will see
so
amazing
one of the
transformation
things
happen.
Malcolm Muggeridge once
That's where
said
we
is
really
that
need
the
to focus.
problem
We're
with
not saying
Jesus'
abdicate
statement
your
about
yeah.
so Malcolm Muggeridge said that one of the problems with Jesus' statements about, render unto Caesar what is Caesar and to God what is God's is he didn't give us a proportion there. And Muggeridge said that he's been living his whole life trying to give way more to God than he has to Caesar, as a habit
Mhm.
of the heart, which I think is the trajectory we want to grow in there. But then, from if you read something like this comes up in a lot of places. Most recently, I saw it in an old book by Wendell Berry, "Blessed Are the Peacemakers," where he said it's interesting to live in a time in which we label something as Christian. It could be our culture or ourselves. And then everything that we do, we therefore define as Christian, which is backwards from
Yeah.
the way that the church and discipleship and Christianity really works. But we do, maybe this is a uniquely American thing of like, I'll just declare myself to be Christian. And then whatever I do, I assume it's Christian because I declared myself to be that. And I'm the one who does it. And I'm Christian. So therefore, this is the Christian response to that. Um, and I don't think that's a cynical read, Cameron. I think we do
No.
implicitly do that. And we don't have many external voices or factors that can kind of slap us out of our silliness sometimes and be like, dude, what you're doing has nothing to do with the gospel um, whatsoever. And so I leave that for your consideration.
Well, what I've found very convicting in a lot of this is that because I talked about how we want to fit in so much in North America, and that's motivated so much of our cultural engagement. We have this whole model predicated on cultural influence that's been very dear to us for a long time. And now we're reaching a juncture where it simply isn't going to work anymore. We don't have a seat at the table unless we fundamentally alter the specifics of the gospel, right?
Well, hey,
So,
wait. So
yeah,
can I make this awkward?
yeah, make
Let
it
me make
awkward.
this awkward. Okay. So what might be required here moving forward is there will have to be at some point some delineation where Christian people will have to point out things that are done in the name of Christ that aren't Christian and say so and be like, no,
Right.
that's not true. And I think
Hmm.
when you're trying to fight a cultural war in Christian terms, you're never going to criticize other Christians because you're going to say, hey, they're on our team and it's under our flag and under our label. So, they're kind of more with us than they're against us. But if you're interested in the preservation of the teachings of Jesus, there will have to be a renewed sense at some point because, hey, America doesn't have a pope, where Christians are going to have to start calling stuff out and saying like, nope, you can't do that and invoke the name of Jesus on that, or nope, that's exactly opposite of what Jesus meant by that, or nope, just because you say so doesn't make it true. And I think that's yeah. Anyway,
Hmm. Well,
just a thought.
I mean, Yeah, and so in the midst of that, wanting to the wanting to fit in, and being embarrassed about a lot of elements of what makes us Christian, and it's true. I think we don't we don't bring this up too often on the show, but all of the shaming of Christianity all the time in all of our media and all of our television shows, it does exercise a powerful effect on us. And many
However,
people do because
and I just preached a sermon, about a third of it was on this. If you look at the suffering that Christ endured, a phenomenally high percentage of that was the mocking and the scoffing and the
right.
sneering and
Oh yeah.
so this is not unfamiliar territory to the nature of the
Oh, I'm not
gospel.
saying it's
I know. I'm just saying that,
right.
throw
I'm
that
not
out there
saying
for
it's
everybody that,
surprising or
like,
that we're victims, but
woe is
yeah,
me, somebody disliked what I said on social media. Well, they didn't nail you naked on a post in public, did they? I mean,
right.
let's have our relative disagreements here on the degree to which we're persecuted
Sure.
and mocked.
But this stuff is happening all the time, and if fitting in culturally or being seen as cool is very near and dear to you, or very near and dear to your missional model, to put it more seriously, then and you think the image problem thing is really driving this,
It's not gonna
well,
work.
then that's going to cause you're going to start feeling really embarrassed about a lot of aspects of Christianity. And so what I find convicting is that the people who have come along lately to say, no, Christianity's pretty great. I mean, it's sponsored some of our greatest civilizational values. It's made us who we are. It's shaped our conscience. Most of the people who are coming along doing that, not Christians. I think that's deeply convicting. Somebody like a Tom Holland, everybody keeps saying, do you mean Spider-Man? No, I mean the writer Tom Holland who wrote Dominion, you know, and or even these people who are coming along and saying this. I mean, here you want to talk about convicting. There's a discussion between Tom Holland and this is on the Unbelievable Network, I think. So Justin Brierly is moderating this, and it's a debate discussion between Tom Holland and AC Grayling, who's also a very doctrinaire, materialist atheist. And at one point, AC Grayling says, I challenge you to name one unique contribution from Christianity to the world. And Tom Holland immediately says, holy matrimony. Marriage as it's conceived in Christianity is utterly unique. I can't find any precedent for it historically, and it's a massive civilizational value and benefit. Now, that's true. In North America, I'm going to bring up a deeply uncomfortable fact. Ever since no fault divorce, which I think happened in 1970, when that went into effect, and this is by the way, is Ronald Reagan who sees this through. Many of these people who are very perceptive cultural critics point to that. Peter Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens' brother, is one of them. He points to that as one of the decisive moments of desecration of marriage, and one of the
Ah,
fundamental kind of forms of destruction in our modern society that has undermined the authority and the prophetic witness of the truth of the church. I'm not talking about people who voted for Donald Trump. This is before any of this. And he even says, I don't even think gay marriage is I think that's one outworking of recent years. I think that no fault divorce was the real beginning of the end,
okay.
in a
So
sense.
here's your problem, Cameron. You're going to be making people think too hard on this one. But so work with me through this of, like, the vision that he is, which is funny that you have two non-Christians discussing this in this way.
Yeah.
Is that Tom Holland sees a deep integration between faith and all the components of culture, more so
Right.
than a lot of Christians do. I mean,
See how convicting
how?
that is?
Well,
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I would say that if you took 10,000 Christians and you asked them what is one of the most significant, unique things that Christianity has contributed to Western civilization, the percentage of them who would say matrimony
Right.
would be
Yep. Vanishingly
very
small,
small.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so my prayer with Richard Dawkins is that he goes further now. So my prayer is that he recognizes what you were just saying earlier, that, well, just the veneer of Christianity, the cathedrals, glorious as they are. I mean, the cathedrals, the hymns, glorious as they are, all of these outworkings alone aren't enough to stave off all those forces that he recognizes now and is so worried about. In order to stave those forces off, you need those Amish neighbors. You need the people who are real men and women of conviction, who are actually living out their faith. If he comes to recognize that, then he is definitely a step closer to being an Ion Hersey Ali. Now, I don't personally, I'm not really, I kind of want to carry a torch there, but I'm not, I don't know that will happen. But I would love to see it. But yeah, but the whole notion that what he's saying there comports with really it's a short step from Richard Dawkins to Christian nationalism. I just don't buy that. I don't think that's right at all. Yeah.
Okay, so here's the thing though. It seems like it was less than 2 months ago, probably when we were talking about, we did the second podcast on Ian Hersey Ali, is you said, I think you asked this question. You said, I wonder who will be the next one. Or we kicked that around a little bit.
We did.
Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. I think she's the tip of the iceberg. Yeah.
Yeah. At that time, though, I was not thinking.
Not Richard Dawkins. Oh, never.
But, okay. Yeah. Let me clarify. Richard Dawkins has not become a cultural Christian because I don't think the category exists.
No.
It's kind of like saying,
tease that out more, Nathan. Yeah. Explain what you mean by that, because I think that's really helpful. Yes.
It's like saying, I like piñatas that are shaped like a donkey because when you smack them with a stick, you get candy. Versus a world in which there are real donkeys. Like the thing that you're saying you like is such a hollow shell of the actual thing that's actually producing the.
Well, can you have Christianity without Christ?
Well, let me back it. No, you can't. Yeah. So let me back it. Let me hit it from this angle. Is that when you get deep into conversations about cultural Christianity, you run up against this awkward fact that if cultural Christianity is important, that Jesus totally forgot to mention it.
Well, you know what I think he's really saying?
I'm just saying, what are the points of the teachings of Jesus that have any bearing on any of this? Well, it's clearly outside of the scope of what Christ was. If you look at the starting point, Jesus didn't go in and perform a bunch of miracles in front of Herod and convince him to convert.
Right.
And that's what a nationalistic cultural Christianity mindset would be. And Jesus functionally would have had the power to do that. But ran the play in the other direction.
He did perform miracles in front of a bunch of Pharisees, and it just made them hate him more and resent him more. It certainly didn't make them convert and fall at his feet. There's something very powerful.
John the Baptist had a great time preaching truth to power.
Right. I mean, there's a very powerful message there about the human heart and the nature of unbelief right there. We all flatter ourselves into thinking, oh, I just need more evidence. Bertrand Russell, not enough evidence. God, I need more evidence. The problem is not evidence. It is absolutely not a lack of evidence. It's never the issue. And also, you've heard the phrase, there are no, atheists in foxholes. Well, what Richard Dawkins seems to be saying is, I'd rather be an atheist in a Christian world.
Yeah, because they don't kill you.
Because they won't kill you. No, I mean, and really, it is that simple. But we're getting back to some of the very basic truths here. This takes you back to Ali saying, when somebody asked her, why are we polarized? Why are we fighting so much? Why are we at each other's throats in this culture? And she asks, well, of course, I mean, that's basically normal to be at one another's throats. I mean, that's human nature. But when you go to a region or a place where people can walk peacefully by one another on the streets without assaulting each other, you need to pause and ask, as I did coming from Mogadishu, why are women not being raped right now? Why are people able to coexist peacefully? And to recognize, wow, that peace, that stability is an achievement. It's not something that we just take for granted or that you just simply mature into. That's what Tom Holland thought before he wrote Dominion. When he started doing research, he thought, well, he bought into the secular myth of progress. Well, as you throw off the shackles of religion and you become educated, you simply mature into a stable civilization and culture. But we're finding that as we throw off the supposed shackles of Christianity, we are not maturing into stability. We are falling apart. I mean, personally and on a national basis. And it's not just limited to the United States. It's happening all over Europe, too. So something's very wrong.
Yeah, okay, but
some people are just recognizing that.
But it's based off of a false anthropology, because if you were a student of history, this would be the most obvious thing to you ever.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think that humans are morally progressing and naturally becoming better
Mhm.
types of people, then you think history isn't relevant here. And what we're just doing is reproving
We are.
Genesis 1.
But if you
I
think
mean,
that
it's just
we are, but if you think
2.
that
Genesis 2.
you
That's what I should.
right, yeah, but well, if Genesis 3 though, right? The fall.
Oh, yeah. Let's go all the way. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you think that, you're not going to read history. Which is why I've said one of the most powerful countercultural activities that you can do is just crack a history book, a good, reliable history book, or a biography. Yeah, like what you're doing right now, Nathan. Read a biography of Napoleon. And one that gives you the context of the times and puts the French Revolution into context. I mean, people who think that we're just if you've bought into a very dogmatic vision of the myth of progress, reading history you're likely going to see that as at best a curious, fun, educational diversion, but at worst a total waste of time. We're past that now. It's obsolete. We need to move on to the next thing, which of course makes you blind to many of the you can't have that whole, well, we've been here before and we know how this plays out. But if you don't know where you've been, it's very difficult to have that kind of wisdom. So, I mean, and of course, it's no accident that Tom Holland and many of these people are historians. I was talking about this at an event I just did, Nathan, and we were noting that some of the best works of apologetics right now are not actually really technically works of apologetics. They're either
Mhm.
intellectual histories tracing the origins of ideas, or they are history, just straight up history, telling us how we got here. And that's because we've been allergic to history for so long, but now we're in a position to think, okay, we're even people who don't pay too much attention to a lot of this stuff just have a general sense of, okay, we're in the process of losing something. It's very precious and we've had it before. Okay, what was it that we had and where did it go? How did we achieve it? Those are all really good questions, and just if you want to think well, crack a history book and begin to work through those. But that's kind of what's happening to a lot of our intellectuals today. They're asking those, how did we get here? How are we losing what we had? And what
Yeah,
exactly
but
was it that we had?
and how did we get there? Because if you look at
Yeah, how
Britain
we
in
get
the
there.
year 1200, or go back into
Right.
the Scottish Highlanders and the Romans times, it's not like there was Westminster Abbey has not perpetually existed where it
Right,
does.
of course.
So
Yes.
so the church does and can redeem and grow out of chaos and bring stability. So on one hand, you can look back and say, how are we surprised about the chaos we're creating? On the other hand, you have to look all the way through it though to say, um, there are rough times ahead, perhaps for
Mhm.
sure, but the church does seem to find a way. Um, in the
Mhm.
end of these times and places. And so when you look at the rate of the growth of the church and everywhere from Iran to Indonesia, um, Christ, I wouldn't bet against him. But Dawkins is not going to become a Christian for any reason other than an act of God, because
Of
he's
course.
all about this follow the evidence, the truth where it lies. And he would just, it's very easy to look at this in a pragmatic sense and say, well, this one just works for me. It makes the most sense. And this is the one I prefer. Even if I can't say that it's true, this is the one that I like. That might be the wiggle spot in his life of whether or not he wants to start making truth statements about religion rather than just practicality statements about it.
Mhm.
I think that's where you see a little bit of a Jordan Peterson waffling there of,
Yep.
do you really want to just go the pragmatism route, or do you want to start trying to discern whether or not there are truth claims involved here? Um,
But
I
can I
hate
just
to
give a
speculate.
well, I just want to give a plug here. So another person we don't mention him too often, but who did also cross the Rubicon and convert was David Brooks. And he was drawn to similar territory for a little while. He began to see the beauty of, well, I mean, as a conservative, he believed that Christianity sponsored some of our greatest civilizational values and achievements, but then he began to see the beauty of its moral vision as well. I just want to give a plug. People who, cultural Christianity sounds like a dirty word, and but it can be an important stepping stone for some people. I've pointed I'd like to point to the example of T.S. Eliot here as well. If you look at T.S. Eliot's
Ah,
conversion to the Church of England, initially, he's a little bit. It looks quite pragmatic. He looks a little bit like a cultural Christian. He matures, and then he gives to us eventually the four quartets, which is an absolutely remarkable achievement and beautiful reflection on faith and
I
his spiritual journey. So this can be a stepping stone. It also constitutes evidence, powerful apologetic evidence for people. This is not a type of evidence we're used to these days. It was big around the Second World War, and I mean, because again, that was a civilizational moment of crisis, and a lot of people began to look at the stability offered by Christianity to a culture. So I just those two things. It can be a
I
stepping stone, and it constitutes evidence as well for people.
well, this far into the game, I recognize that we're missing something here, which is help me flesh this out, and then you can wrap this up and
Okay,
save
yeah.
save everyone from our meanderings. But I think we're using the word cultural Christianity in two ways, and that's maybe
Hmm.
some of the confusion. So there's one version of cultural Christianity is like, yeah, we all go to church on Easter, and we
Yes.
mildly celebrate Christmas with Santa Claus, and we mean we're Christian in the sense that we're not Muslim or something else, but like we get most of our
Hmm.
theology through country music songs. So there's cultural Christianity and like my grandma was Christian kind of thing. That's just a yeah, um, and it's a non-engaged form of some sort of traditional leftovers of something that preceded it. There's that's not what we're talking about here though when you're looking at somebody doing some kind of deep dive cultural analysis on the stability, functionality, and pragmatism of the background of kind of these meta narratives and the way in which they express themselves in culture. Y- Does that does
Yes,
my
it does.
confusion make sense there?
It's really
Yeah,
important, and we should have done this at the beginning. We're going backwards here, but yes.
that's
So
classic us.
there's let me put it this way: there's cultural Christianity, and then there is really the culture of Christianity or the culture of the church that people come to appreciate. So cultural
Yeah,
Christianity, in the sense that you just first spelled it out, Nathan. Also, the other way of looking at it would be, yeah, somebody inherits the faith and they're nominal, and it's a kind of cheaply inherited faith, or there's a social advantage attached to being a church going person. That's cultural Christianity as well, or sometimes it's called country club Christianity. It's largely going the way of the dinosaur, but there are still, I mean, America is geographically complex, and there are certain pockets here. There's still neighborhoods and towns and places here where it behooves you to be a member of a church, even if you don't really necessarily believe. It's just the right thing to do. You're seen as an upstanding citizen and a good staple of the community. If you want to run for any kind of political office, you better belong to a church, that kind of thing. So there's that kind of cultural Christianity. But then there is somebody like a T.S. Eliot or like a Tom Holland who recognizes we're at a civilizational moment. There's a profound cultural crisis happening, and we're experiencing social disintegration, fraying of social bonds. And they look at the culture of the church, they look at the culture of Christianity, the way it shapes institutions, the way it shapes people, the way it's moral, the outworking of its moral vision. And they recognize not necessarily the truth of Christ, but they might get there, but they recognize the efficacy of this vision and how it really can contribute to human flourishing, and how it binds people together, gives them a shared moral vision and a common cause that is absolutely invaluable just from a cultural standpoint. So that those are two very different things. And the one is, so cultural Christianity and there's a social advantage to this, I'm using this just purely pragmatically, probably not going to get you very far. The other has real possibilities if you keep following that. You're basically on a pilgrimage if you do that. And if you go all the way, obviously that's you'll need the prompting of the Holy Spirit, but if you go all the way, you'll end up falling at the feet of Christ. That's the logical end of that journey. I don't, does that make sense? I think that would be
I
the
think
way
that's
I
a good
would
spot to leave
spell
it.
out those.
Yeah. No, I think that's really helpful to say cultural Christianity versus the culture of the church. Um, yeah, that's helpful. That's
Well,
helpful.
we've
I want to
yeah.
leave people with one before you wrap this up, Cameron. I want to leave people with
No,
one unhelpful.
you wrap it up, man.
Okay, all
I
right.
give to you the wrap up.
Okay, but I don't know. I'm gonna kill the wonderful mood you just set. For those of you who have or have not been attuned to the YouTube channel Lutheran Satire, do you know the Lutheran Satire channel, Cameron? The two
Come on,
Irish guys.
Patrick.
Come on, Patrick. Yeah. So
Yeah, of course.
they're pretty famous for their they meet St.
Trinity
Patrick and
video,
go through
yeah.
the bad Trinitarian analogies, but they also have 2 parts of them meeting Richard Dawkins. So if you want an animated cartoon to make you giggle just a little bit, look up Lutheran Satire Richard Dawkins, and you get a good chuckle out of that. So I think the hope is the same as we come into the end of this, Cameron, that God frequently works on people who we do not expect in unexpected ways. And we cannot rule out the God factor in the future of anything, whether it be our cultures, our nations, individuals that we know, people we've been praying for. You should pray with a grin because of what God is able to do in the lives in unexpected ways and in our own lives. And that should really give us a real livable hope. I mean, so this is the advantage of getting a little bit older. Of like, I remember living in Oxford in the times in which Richard Dawkins was kind of a big deal and the boogeyman to the church, and that balloon has popped. And so some of these things that we're stressed out about right now, give it a decade and see if anybody remembers. But when it comes to the worship of God, give it a decade and don't be surprised at all when they're even more doing that. So worshiping the Lord. So I think there's a sense in which we can look at this, as a interesting sociological, cultural analysis, but we don't want to take out the spiritual implications of it, particularly as we think about what it is that God might do in us and through us in the world. And so our role in this is to have fun chatting about it, but then to day by day see what the Lord wants of us and be obedient to that. So we'll leave you with that. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.